All right, guys, it is time to wrap up our official preseason rankings for the 2023 fantasy football redraft season, going in and diving into the world of tight ends today. So as always, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are new here, comment down below what you personally think of these tight ends, and I'll go ahead and cue that intro. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football, where today we're wrapping up our preseason rankings, and we've already covered wide receivers and running backs, quite in depth, I might add, talked about quarterbacks just a couple days ago on Tuesday, and today we're going to wrap it up with the tight end position. Hopefully keeping this video pretty short and sweet today. It is the other onesie position apart from quarterback, as long as you're in a single quarterback league, but unlike the quarterbacks, I think the tight end position, it's been pretty stagnant. I think it's, dare I say, the least important position for fantasy football. So we're just going to touch on these guys a little quickly. I don't think there's going to be too many hot takes. I'll go into elaborate where on the tight ends that I feel are necessary, but some of them, they are pretty self-explanatory where their rankings are. So we're going to only cover the top 10 tight ends really in depth. We'll talk about a few sleepers at the end, maybe some, either ors if you decide to punt the tight end position. Outside of the top 10, who I'm looking for in those late round pickups. But without further ado, let's jump into it. Tight end, number one. Is anyone surprised? No, it's Travis Kelce. I really don't think I need to talk about this. Maybe there's a little bit of a concern. He's 33 now, might be 34 when the season kicks off. But this dude, over the past 6 seasons, he's been tight end 1, 1, 1, 2, 1. He's still playing at an incredibly elite level, tied to the best quarterback in the NFL and Patrick Mahomes, with one of the best offensive minds in the game, and Andy Reid. I have him tight end 1. Sleeper has him tight end 1. He finished as a tight end 1 last year, miles ahead of everyone else with an astounding 15.4 fantasy points per game. That's going to be even higher if you're in a PPR league, because he's just a PPR machine. He really operates as the wide receiver of this Kansas City offense, and that's what's led to him being a first-round pick. His current ADP is at the 106. That's personally a little rich for me. I don't really want to invest in a tight end. Like I said, I know it might be a hot take, but in the intro, I think tight end might be the least relevant fantasy position. I've been very adamant and very vocal about taking wide receivers in the first round, whether it's, reaching a little bit on a Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, CeeDee Lamb. If you're at the 106, 107 position, that's really where I'm going. I might take Travis Kelce when it comes to the end of the first round, but you won't find me taking him at the 105, 106 position. I just think there's better. It's hard to say there's a better value in the first round with all these guys having first round grades, but I'd rather just go for, a more relevant fantasy position there. But Travis Kelce, tight end 1, no one's surprised. Tight end 2 is also going to come as a shock to absolutely nobody, and it will be Mark Andrews of the Baltimore Ravens. Last year he finished as the tight end 4, but he's still currently ranked as a tight end 2 according to Sleeper. A guy that's a little bit more palatable at his ADP his current ADP is late second round, early third round, and I'm absolutely really, really okay with that. Last year was a really rough year for Mark Andrews, only averaging 10.1 fantasy points per game, but he struggled with injury across the entirety of the season, and frankly, the entire Ravens team was abysmal across the offense. You had multiple injuries to the wide receiver core. You had, J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards not really fully healed from both of their ACL injuries on and off the field throughout the season. Injuries to Lamar Jackson. This is just a rough offense all around for the Ravens, and with a team that was ranked nearly last in the NFL in offensive efficiency and offensive points scored. It's obviously going to reflect that in their offensive weapons. And Mark Andrews, despite being a very top tier tight end, very talented tight end, he fell a little bit as a tight end 4, and obviously missing some time with injury as well. With Todd Monken coming back in, with Mark Andrews fully healthy, with Lamar Jackson under contract and healthy, with some wide receivers in Zay and Odell to spread the ball around, not to mention Rashad Bateman coming back fully healthy, I think it's going to be an absolute upgrade for Mark Andrews. Prior to last season, he was a perennial top 2 tight end. I think he's 4 finishes before that were tight end 2, tight end 2, tight end 2, tight end 1, before it dropped down to tight end 4. but still an overall great value. Again, if you had to, push come to shove, Travis Kelce in the first round and Mark Andrews at the early third round, I'm going to go with Mark Andrews in the early third round. I think he represents an adequate production compared to Travis Kelce, and you can still stock up on two highly talented wide receivers, or maybe a running back and wide receiver before grabbing him in the third round. So I'm a little preferential to taking Mark Andrews in the third round there, but to absolutely no one's shock, he might go a little bit earlier, just based on how people value positional advantage. Some people think having those elite talent tight ends are a positional advantage, and with some of the downgrades we've seen recently, we've seen Devontae Adams struggle with injury, hasn't returned to training camp yet. We've seen, Ramondre Stevenson and Breece Hall's stock decline as of the additional sightings of Kareem Hunt and Dalvin Cook. So Jonathan Taylor still continues to be absent from the team. Josh Jacobs still hasn't signed and hasn't committed to playing for the season, so you might see a guy like Mark Andrews creep up into the end of that second round. Moving on to my tight end 3, it's going to be Dallas Goedert for the Philadelphia Eagles. Maybe the first time I deviate from consensus here. Sleeper has him ranked as tight end 6. I personally has him ranked as the tight end 3. Last season, he finished as a tight end 12, averaging 9.5 fantasy points per game, and his current ADP is in the 6th round. He is currently my favorite tight end to draft just because of that 6th round ADP, and I think he's going to be one of the tight ends that clearly outperforms his ADP. Again, he was a target monster prior to his injury. I believe that was in week 10 or 11 where he missed 4 games. He was very consistently garnering between 6 to 9 targets, which is an absolute elite status for a tight end, and was having, some very monster games, very consistently in the double digits, had a 22-point game, which is going to be absolutely incredible at the tight end position. I do believe that, his tight end 12 finish, not reflective of his talent because of the games he missed. Also, when he came back into the offense for the last 3 games of the fantasy football season, week 15, 16, and 17, it seemed like he was still struggling with injury. Based on the injury he had, he actually came back quicker than the doctors had prescribed, and that certainly reflected in his performance as well as his snap share. He went from having an average of over 90% snap share down to below 80, as well as only having 6 fantasy points, 8 fantasy points, and 7 fantasy points on a much lower number of targets. So he clearly was not fully recovered from that injury, and I think that kind of drops down his fantasy finish as well as average points per game. But apart from that, this is a guy that's tied to a highly efficient offense, one of the top-ranked offenses in the Philadelphia Eagles. They will be in the end zone very consistently, and that's going to be a huge touchdown upside for Dallas Goedert. He might not be the first option. I mean, we talk about Kelce and Andrews. They are clearly the first options on either their respective teams. Dallas Goedert obviously falls behind, A.J. Brown, potentially Devonta Smith. At the goal line, you're going to see that two-cheek push from Jalen Hurts to get it across the goal line. He's basically their primary running back in the red zone. But, with the talent that Dallas Goedert possesses, being a 5-year veteran with the Philadelphia Eagles, I think he's tremendously talented and attached to this offense. I'm a big fan of him. Again, my favorite tight end to draft, in the 6th round, it allows you to pick up 2 high-quality tight ends, 2 high-quality wide receivers, maybe a quarterback in front of that if you want to jump in on the top 6. Miles Sanders at running back, maybe 2 running backs, and you can basically have your core of your team filled out before grabbing a guy that I think is a top-tier talent at tight end. So yeah, basically he's my favorite pick when it comes to tight end. I cannot, champion this guy enough for the 2023 fantasy football season. Moving on to number 4, it's going to be George Kittle, if I can spell his name correctly. Tight end for the San Francisco 49ers. A lot of questions around him, which is why he might fall a little bit outside, or he falls down a little bit behind Dallas Goedert for me. But let's go over. I'm consensus with Sleeper here. They have him as his tight end 4. My tight end 4 as well. His ADP is a little bit higher than Dallas Goedert in the 5th round. A little rich for me, but if, I've seen some people reach on a Darren Waller, reach on a Kyle Pitts, and if that causes George Kittle to fall to the 6th round, I'm very much okay with taking George Kittle in the 6th or 7th round if he falls below that average draft position. Last year, he finished as the tight end 3, averaging 11.4 fantasy points per game. And that's obviously a result of George Kittle for, I don't want to say for like once in his life, but, he is a very injury-prone player. We see him, he currently has a questionable tag on him right now due to a preseason injury. I mean, he's just been one of those guys that, you have to pencil in 2 or 3 missed games per season, but he was able to stay out on the field for entirety of last season, and especially as the rest of the team dealt with injuries, with Elijah Mitchell, with Deebo Samuel missing a bunch of time. George Kittle came in and was, a primary target for a handful of games, and he certainly reaped the rewards. Again, we don't know what's going to happen. I guess similar to the Eagles, there's just, a plethora of weapons, even more so than the Eagles. We talked about Dallas Goedert being maybe the third option in that offense. Well, George Kittle, he might fall down even further. You have a Deebo Samuel. A lot of people are projecting the breakout for Brandon Ayuk this season as a truly talented wide receiver. You have Christian McCaffrey, who's the number one guy in that offense, whether it's pass catching, rushing the ball, and damn, he can even throw the ball. He threw a touchdown last season. And Elijah Mitchell has been kind of the tried and true running back for the past 2 years with the 49ers, and when he was healthy, he was adequately worked into that offensive play scheme because we know how much Kyle Shanahan loves his running backs as well. I just feel like, George Kittle is not going to have the same, he'll have the same snap share as Dallas Goedert, but I think his targets are going to be a little bit more volatile. You'll have games where he has 9 targets, a touchdown, 110 yards, and it'll be great for fantasy. But you are going to see those games as well where he disappears, really only gets 3 targets, doesn't convert, maybe he has only 40 yards. So I think the volatility makes him I'm a little bit more adverse to him at his current ADP, but certainly a very talented player. And if he can stay on the field, a guy that he is a tight end that, you lock him, you start him, you move on, you don't have to think about it too much. So again, I continue to forget about tiers. That's going to wrap up tier 2. Tier 1 was obviously Travis Kelce. He is in a tier of his own. No questions, ifs, ands, or buts about it. Tier 2 was Mark Andrews, Dallas Goedert, and George Kittle. That wraps up tier 2. Now we move on to our tier 3 guys that I'm just, I really haven't drafted a lot of them because I think, for whatever concerns I have about them, injury, consistency, volatility, their ADP is just a little bit too high, but if they fall outside of a very certain draft threshold, I'm okay with drafting them. Number 5 is going to be TJ Hawkinson, and I voiced my concerns about him all offseason. Sleeper and a lot of platforms have him ranked as a tight end 3. He is my current tight end 5. I don't understand why he is that highly ranked. Last year he was very consistent. I mean, he almost had the same fantasy points production as Dallas Goedert. He had 10.1 fantasy points compared to Goedert's 9.5. But the thing that separates Goedert versus Hawkinson was that Hawkinson was on the field for every single game. Did not miss, no injury concerns with Hawkinson, and that means he finished as the tight end 2. But because he finished as the tight end 2, that was more of a reflection of his consistency on the field and his best ability, which is availability, not so much his talent and upside. He really only had that one high upside game with the Detroit Lions where he scored like 36 points because Amon-Ra St. Brown, DJ Chark, DeAndre Swift, they were all injured. They were all missing. He was literally the only option for the Detroit Lions on offense. If we take out that 133-point game, his points per game, they drop well below what Dallas Goedert has. He drops down to tight end 4 finish behind Mark Andrews. And I think, a lot of what his production was generated from was being on the Vikings. They needed a tight end. Irv Smith was not cutting it. So guess what? They brought in TJ Hawkinson, and he was a huge beneficiary of the fact that Adam Thielen regressed tremendously. And Justin Jefferson, besides being the best wide receiver, there was a lot of games where he was locked up because every defense was like, there is literally no other threat on this offense. We're just going to double Justin Jefferson every single play. I mean, very vividly remember the Dallas game in week 7, or sorry, not the Dallas game, the Packers game in week 17, where he had 2 catches for 15 yards. It was absolutely brutal because they just stuck Jair Alexander, and then Adrian Amos would come over, or another safety, another corner, maybe Rasul Douglas out of the slot CB position would come over, and they would just double him every single play, and they just could not get the ball to him. With Adam Thielen regressing, with KJ Osborne not really stepping up, who was the only option left to throw to? It was TJ Hawkinson. He was a PPR monster last season, but with Jordan Addison stepping into the fold, I think that's going to it's not going to impact Justin Jefferson, but it's going to vulture a ton of the opportunity and production that TJ Hawkinson had. So I'm going to see a lot of the production decrease as Jordan Addison makes an immediate impact as a rookie. So right now he's currently being drafted in the 4th round. That is way too rich for my blood. I will never draft him there. He's a guy that I would draft after even after George Kittle and Dallas Goedert. So, he has to fall basically to the 7th round for him to be palatable, which just won't happen in my opinion. So let someone else take him. Let someone else struggle at the tight end position because they're not going to have those big week winning games that a Kittle, a Goedert, and Andrews, a Kelce could provide to you. Moving on to tight end 6, it's going to be Evan Ingram. Big bounce back year for Ingram and the Jacksonville Jaguars. I have him a little bit higher ranked than consensus. Sleeper has him as a tight end 8. I have him as a tight end 6. Last season, he finished as the tight end 6, averaging 8.3 fantasy points per game, and that is after a very, very slow start to the season. He had just signed a 1-year deal with the Jaguars, took some time to get incorporated to this offense, but once Week 7, Week 8, when Trevor Lawrence made that jump, when the offense as a whole made that jump, Evan Ingram was right there with him. An absolute target monster. He was over 20% in target share for that time period, the last 6 to 7 games of the season, and absolutely reaped the rewards. A lot of people rode him to a fantasy championship. Current ADP is in the 9th round. Again, just some sleeper wide receivers that I like a little bit better. Zay Flowers is a guy that I'm really targeting in the 9th round, maybe a little bit over Evan Ingram. And I just think that his production as a tight end 6, after you get outside the top 5 tight ends, I'm just punting the entire position. I think you can get 90% of the production that Evan Ingram or any of these other guys that I mentioned from 6 to 10, with streaming tight ends every week in and week out. So I'd rather take that upside shot on, a late round tight end or a late round wide receiver or a late round late round running back. But yeah, a lot of the issues people thought, with the franchise tag or with bringing in Brenton Strange, Evan Ingram's production was going to go down. Maybe they didn't re-sign him. Well, they signed him to the 3rd most expensive tight end contract in the history of the NFL. He's going to be there for the next 3 seasons. Has a great connection with Trevor Lawrence. I expect him to be a very productive tight end. Again, not broaching the production of the top 5, but a guy that, I want to say borderline. You plug and play, you stick him in, you don't really worry about it. And if Trevor Lawrence does make that leap that everyone is projecting, then he'll certainly be a very, very valuable tight end. My tight end 6 there. Wrapping up tier 3 is going to be my tight end 4, which is Pat Fryermuth. Tight end 7, which is Pat Fryermuth for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's currently ranked the tight end 9 by Sleeper, so I'm a little bit higher than that at tight end 7. He is the tight end 8. He finished as tight end 8 last year with 7.8 fantasy points per game. But again, this is very similar to what we talked about with Evan Ingram. I'm projecting an upgrade upgrade of the offense as a whole. Kenny Pickett, he struggled in his rookie season. There's, Mitch Trubisky to Kenny to back to Mitch. Now it's going to be consistently consistently Kenny Pickett starting as the quarterback. There's not going to be any, questions surrounding who's going to be the quarterback of the team. And there really was no offensive addition to the Pittsburgh Steelers this offseason. In fact, they got rid of Chase Claypool and they never really decided to go out and address that. So they're going to go forward with their main 3 wide pass catching options, which is going to be Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, and Pat Fryermuth. I understand that they did draft Darnell Washington out of Georgia in the 3rd round. However, I view him more as a blocking tight end. His nickname is the 6th offensive lineman. He might see some work in the red zone, but I don't think he's going to impact Pat Fryermuth as much as people are projecting or as much as people are thinking. He's going to be one of those guys really reminiscent of a Mo Alley Cox. 2 targets per game, going to be in the end zone. If he catches 1 pass for a touchdown, that would be a great game for Darnell Washington, but he's really going to be used in 2 tight end sets to block for Najee Harris and really strengthen that offensive line. Again, the moniker for Pittsburgh this past offseason was build the picket fence, and that's what they've done. They went out and they signed Isaac Seumalo. They drafted what is his name? They drafted the Georgia offensive lineman after trading up with the New England Patriots, and then they go ahead and draft Darnell Washington to be that 6th offensive lineman. I think nothing of that is going to really contribute or take away from Pat Fryermuth's targets or his production on the field. And again, as Pat goes into his 3rd season, as Kenny Pickett goes into his 2nd season, again, he's just been a guy that is consistently productive, especially in PPR formats. Maybe he doesn't have the massive touchdown upside, but a very good safety blanket for a young quarterback, a guy that can really work the intermediate and short routes, and again, a guy that is generally targeted very highly on 3rd downs or in need to get 1st down situations. I think this is a guy that, especially in PPR formats, drafting him in the 8th round isn't the worst idea in the world and can certainly be a very productive tight end. That's going to wrap up tier 3 for me. So just to recap, tier 3 was Hawkinson at 5, Ingram at 6, and fryermuth at 7. Moving into our tier 4, we'll start with Kyle Pitts, a guy that I just can't get behind. A lot of people are very high on him. Everyone keeps projecting this breakout. I mean, because he is truly talented. He's an insanely talented player. He's a freak of an athlete when it comes to the tight end position, but that doesn't necessarily translate to production on the field. Sleeper has him ranked as the tight end 5. He's my tight end 8. But guess what? Why I have him ranked so low? Because last season he finished as the tight end 33, only averaging 6.2 fantasy points per game. And at the 5th round, I've seen, well, with the rise in Darren Waller and Goedert and Kittle recently, his ADP has probably fallen a little bit outside of the 5th round. But still, I'm not taking this guy until maybe, honestly, after Evan Ingram and Pat Fryermuth. I mean, these ranks, are very consistent with how I want to draft my tight end positions. And I just don't think the passing offense for the Falcons is going to be there. They drafted Bijan Robinson 8 overall. They've continued to invest in this offensive line. And, the breakdown, the projection of what they see the running back between Tyler Algier and Bijan Robinson, they said it's going to be, 200 touches for Bijan and 175 touches for Tyler Algier. That's what StatMuse, I think, projected over the course of this season. So, again, that leaves very few touches for the passing offense. And we know Desmond Ridder, he's not the most accurate passer. He doesn't have the biggest arm. And I just think, it's going to be a repeat of last year when we saw Marcus Mariota averaging 9, 10, 11 pass attempts per game. Probably think this is right in line with what Desmond Ridder is going to get. So I'm kind of fading all the pass catchers in Atlanta, despite how incredibly athletic Kyle Pitts is. Just the volume is not going to be there for him to, really create any sort of production at the tight end position. At tight end 9, again, a guy that it's just the narrative of Dalton Schultz. A little bit higher on him than consensus. Sleeper has him at tight end 11. I have him at tight end 9. He finished as a tight end 10 last year, averaging 7.6 fantasy points per game. But he finished as a tight end 10 even with missing almost the first half of the season with injury. I think is very, very impressive. He's been an insane pass catching tight end. Honestly, calling him Travis Kelce light is disrespectful to Travis Kelce. He's more like Travis Kelce light in the fact that, he's not a blocker. He's a pure route running, receiving tight end. He's not going to be used in the run game. He's not going to be on the field when it comes to blocking. They'll be using other tight ends for that. But again, this is the narrative. We're looking at, a first-year quarterback in CJ Stroud with the Houston Texans, and it's always been, what is the security blanket for a first-year quarterback? It's the tight end position. And when the play breaks down, they're going to go to the tight end. They're the big body target that if they're a little bit inaccurate, you can rely on them to go up, high point the ball, catch the ball. A lot of these plays and the offensive schemes in Houston with the rookie quarterback are going to be a little more simplified, which is going to rely on the tight end a little bit more. So especially in PPR formats, he does not have that touchdown upside, as I expect the offense for the Texans to be horrific, to say the least. But, as a PPR guy, he should be averaging 5, 6, 7 targets a game, pulling in 4 or 5 of those, and racking up 60 to 70 yards per game. And, it's going to give you a very startable asset at the tight end position, a guy that, if you've punted the position, I'm picking him up in the 11th round, absolutely. And frankly, this is going to become a sacrilege, but my last tight end I'm going to rank here at the number 10 position is going to be Darren Waller. Again, a guy that's been absolutely skyrocketing in rankings, and I don't blame you. I can certainly see the argument for why people are very, very high on Darren Waller this year. He is a guy that has done it before. He has been a top 3 tight end for fantasy in years past, but, he's on the wrong side of 30. He hasn't been able to stay on the field for the past 3 years. Again, this is a guy that when you don't want to bet on injury, but the injury history here is a glaring red flag. And listen, I get all the hype. He was brought into the New York Giants to be their number 1 pass catching target. He apparently has a great connection with Daniel Jones. There's even a report that the offensive coordinator took Darren Waller off the field just to force Daniel Jones to pass to someone else. But again, we need to make sure Darren Waller actually stays on the field and stays healthy. Again, like I said, I'm a little bit lower on him. He's my tight end 10. Sleeper has him ranked as a current tight end 7, but I know some people are drafting him as a tight end 5. The hype around him is skyrocketing. I do try to avoid players that, get hyped up in August. Again, it typically overvalues their ADP. So with him having an ADP currently in the 5th, 6th round, it's a little bit rich for me. Again, I would be gladly taking Dallas Goedert, George Kittle, and TJ Hawkinson over what he can provide. But when it comes to the Giants offense as a whole, I'm just projecting massive regression. This is why I'm fading Saquon Barkley. It's why, Daniel Jones didn't make my top 15 quarterbacks. They had a great season, but if you look at all the stats and metrics, all the passing yards that Daniel Jones had, the passing touchdowns, the actual total offensive metrics, it was a complete outlier. If you looked at what the average win total and the average, performance of what those stats at a quarterback would translate to, it was like, I think 4 or 5 games below what they actually won. It was a complete outlier of a season, and I don't think it's performance that can be replicated if they just continue to play the way they did last year. Again, they way outperformed their stats, they way outperformed their talent, they way outperformed the metrics they put up, and I'm expecting regression from the offense as a whole, and basically the team as a whole, from the New York Giants, especially being stuck in a very tough division going up against incredible defenses in all of the Cowboys, the Commanders, and the Eagles. So again, I understand the hype around Darren Waller. I understand he's very talented, but I'm just projecting, the age, the injury concern, and the regression of the New York Giants as a whole. He's a guy that I'm avoiding as ADP. I think it's really, really rich and might be honestly a landmine of a pick in the 5th, 6th round. So that's going to wrap it up. That was our top 10 tight ends. Some sleepers. We talked about this with tight ends to buy low on earlier in the summer. And I think, with the tight end position being maybe not the sexiest fantasy football position, a lot of those takes remain the same. Guys that if you're punting the position, I'm really in on. Hayden Hurst is a great target. Again, follows the same narrative as a Dalton Schultz, where you want to go just find that security blanket for the rookie quarterback. It's going to be a safety blanket for the rookie QBs, simplified offensive scheme, and a guy that, follow the money. Hayden Hurst got a 3-year contract from the Panthers, and I think he's going to be utilized, especially with how abysmal that wide receiver room is. Irv Smith for the Cincinnati Bengals. Again, you want a guy that he's athletic, he's talented, hasn't really put it together on the field, but now that he's tied to one of the most prolific passing offenses in the NFL with Joe Burrow and the Cincinnati Bengals, he certainly is supposed to reap some of that production. And then finally, Greg Dulcich is just a guy that, a lot of people are hyping up as a sleeper. I'm not really a fan of Greg Dulcich. Again, I think there's a lot of dysfunction in the Broncos organization, a lot more that needs to be fixed than just Sean Payton coming in. And guess what? Russ historically does not throw to his tight ends. So I think people drafting Greg Dulcich in the 10th, 11th round, expecting him to be this breakout guy, are going to be sorely disappointed. And then the last one I'll talk about, Dalton Kincaid versus Chigoziem Okonkwo. Again, 2 guys, their current ADP is in the 12th, 13th round. They are the tight end 12 and 13 respectively, according to Sleeper ADP, guys that are back-to-back. A lot of people are projecting a breakout season for Chigoziem Okonkwo. Again, I love him. Big UMD fan over here, so obviously I love him coming out of UMD, but I just can't get behind the abysmal passing offense that is the Tennessee Titans at the moment. I think it's going to run through Derrick Henry, and I think, we're looking at Chig getting 2 to 4 targets per game and not being able to, unless he's wildly efficient, more efficient than any tight end in the history of the NFL, he won't be, a top 5, 6 tight end for fantasy football. At that ADP, I'm going to take Dalton Kincaid. I know historically you preach against taking rookie tight ends producing, not only in the NFL, but for fantasy football. But this is a guy that, again, it's a disservice and an insult to Travis Kelce, calling him Travis Kelce light, maybe Travis Kelce light, but does fall in that prototype of a tight end that does not, that is not a run blocker. He's not a blocking tight end. He's purely a guy they're going to be using in the slot as a big, a slot pass catcher guy that's purely a route runner at the tight end position and being tied to one of those top 5 offenses in both point scoring and offensive efficiency for the Buffalo Bills. Is a guy that, if you've punted all the way to the end of the draft, take Dalton Kincaid and then back it up with an Irv Smith. That's a great strategy as well. If I get sniped on Dallas Goedert or George Kittle, normally that's what I find myself doing, is taking a Dalton Kincaid and then maybe a Hayden Hurst or an Irv Smith with the last couple picks of my draft. That's a great strategy. So I'm going to wrap it up there. A little bit shorter video, as we get closer and closer to the start of fantasy football. I know there's tons of fantasy content, so again, I really appreciate you guys coming into my 1x1 square inch of the fantasy football community here on YouTube. Next week we'll do a Superflex mock draft, And then we're going to go and do also another video, just, the state of the preseason, risers, fallers, what's going on, what can we glean, what information can we take away from the first 2 preseason games. So just, a massive news drop episode. I think that should be very fun. And then, after that, we'll talk about how this channel is going to look going into the actual season and what the content's going to look like and how we're obviously going to evolve to hopefully make it better for you guys, make content you guys want to consume. So that should be very fun. But hopefully, guys, you enjoy week 2 of the preseason. Should be some more fun games. Hopefully a lot more information to glean. And as always, take care.